Stop normalizing Nazis. Should we watch this for a minute? Sure. So,
there you are, playing the PvP in your World War II shooter, and all of a sudden, you're a Nazi.
Isn't it all of a sudden? Is it all of the sudden?
You didn't ask for this. You didn't choose this.
I decided to play a World War II shooter, dude. PvP? A World War II PvP shooter. It's gonna be Allies versus Axis. Dog? What do you mean? I did choose this eventuality by playing a PvP World War II shooter. What do you think's gonna happen?
Yet there it is. And it's treated no differently than playing a British soldier.
Because it's a PvP game. Designed to be played for hundreds or thousands of hours. The historical setting is more of a theming for a sport-like game. A competition of skill in the game's mechanics. Like, this is gonna be crazy. I mean, it's possible he's gonna argue against World War II as a setting for PvP shooter games. You could do that, but imagine if you played a World War II PvP shooter game, where anytime you played as Axis, you had to sit through like a 1-minute Holocaust presentation so you understand how bad the people you're playing as are. No one's gonna play that.
This is bad on so many levels. No one should ever have a random chance of fighting for the Nazis.
I agree, no one should be forced to play a video game in which you can be put on Team Nazi. Fundamentally, I agree with that concept if I take it out of the context of what I know he's saying. Yeah, no one should be forced to play a World War II shooter game.
And we should never express that there's no meaningful difference between Nazis and Allied soldiers, or that they're functionally interchangeable.
In what context?
And before anyone equivocates and says not all German soldiers in World War II were Nazis.
That would not be my response to that. Okay? That's not my primary problem.
If they were wearing the swastika and are functioning as an arm of the Nazi government, then unless the game goes out of its way to tell you specifically that your particular character is not a Nazi,
they're not normally characters. They're not real people. The 3D model in the game that you are controlling is not actually a Nazi. Okay?
then they're a Nazi. In that multiplayer shooter, when it switched you to the German side, did it go out of its way to tell you that the person you're playing was pressed
I was joking!
into service under threat of their life? Yeah, that's a big ol' nope.
Hey, is anyone playing that game who didn't already think Nazis were good, thinking, damn, Nazis are great? Again, this gun's cool, I need to shoot.
Oh,
I need to shoot my enemy and get points.
On a similar note, let's please stop forcing people to play as terrorists as well.
This isn't real. This is another AI-generated video. Terrorists win.
There you are, playing your modern shooter, and all the...
This is only 4 years? This video is from 4 years ago? I thought this shit was gonna say 2013. No way.
Sudden you're a terrorist. You didn't ask for this.
I'm not a terrorist. The character, and if we're talking about Counter-Strike, right? Character is a bit more than what you actually are controlling, but the game piece I'm controlling is flavored as a terrorist. I'm not a terrorist. I am not the character I control. The entity I control a game. I'm not a terrorist now. I'm playing the game with a terrorist character that's on the terrorist team. That's way different.
You didn't choose this, and yet second verse, same as the first. There it is. I mean, that's
Also, I did choose it. Yeah.
literally the name of your side in the game.
Mm-hmm.
We can do better than this. Even if you put aside all of the people who have had...
Hey! Extra credits. You'll love a game. It's called America's Army. It's a propaganda game for the US Army, wherein you never play as the terrorists. Your side is always the US Army. The people you're fighting always look like terrorists, but from their side, they look like their US Army as well. I feel like he'd find that worse than this. That game is surprisingly deep. There is actually a philosophical message. So true, right? There's actually a philosophical message to America's army that is presumably not intended.
Traumatic experiences with these groups who have lost loved ones to terrorists or who have had generations of
Hey, extra credits. If I'm going to be a schizo like you, isn't it better that when you're playing a game where you're killing people to sometimes be a person the player, sometimes control a person the player considers bad, rather than killing always being done by the good guys? Killing is good. You're a good guy when you do killing. The people who kill, they're good guys. You're always a good guy when you kill. Wouldn't he have a problem with that message?
their families wiped out by Nazis. No one should have to put on the costume of an ideology they find abhorrent without actually opting into it in your game.
It's called buying the game. Look, if you buy Teletubbies Coloring Time for Children and you put it on for your little 3-year-old niece to play, and then out of nowhere there's like a Nazi going, "Ah, you have joined the NSDAP! You are Hitler's top man! Oh, you're a Nazi, little girl!" Sure, that's fucked up. If you download Counter-Strike and then get put on the terrorist team, no shit, retard. That's the game. Did you look at the game page? Oh, there are Nazis in World War II. Be a Nazi simulator? Crazy. Just don't buy it, moron.
And by making people do so, we get them to stop thinking about it, to stop thinking of the meaning behind these things.
You don't normalize them because they're not thinking about it like, I'm playing as a Nazi and I'm good, so Nazis are good. These things I'm doing, they're good. Nazis are good. People aren't thinking that.
We normalize them. We make them just window dressing for entertainment.
What if I suggest most games that are World War II PvP do not include the elements that you would not want to be normalized? It's really just a paint job, right? I'm not inherently revolted by Nazi uniforms either. It's actually contextual still.
Those uniforms, those symbols, become things that no longer inherently revolt us. They reduce our visceral reaction to seeing the embodiment of these ideologies. Now, does this make us...
I don't think Nazi uniforms are the embodiment of Nazi ideology. I would suggest something else is. I don't think that uniform is fruit of the ideology. I don't think... You know what Nazism leads to? This uniform! You f***ing mongoloid, you f***ing retard. You have to stop the Nazis. They're gonna start. Hugo Boss will be resurrected.
Totally ignore the history that comes with them?
If someone wearing a Nazi, like Jesus comes back, cures all the sick, says, "You've been misled. I'm here to purify the world. Everyone gets raptured. It's great. It's great." But then he has a swastika tattoo. He's bad now. No, that's not the...
No. But for some people, it moves them from the territory of revolting to just edgy. It makes scrawling a swastika on something change from unthinkable to just dangerous. It means you might not take iron crosses all over a website as a warning sign that you should immediately leave. And
on any f***ed up racist website that has iron crosses, the thing that clues you in is like when they're like, "We need TND. Like, look at these subhumans." That's the bit. That's the bit. Like, what do you mean?
If you don't leave, you might start reading and buying into hateful ideas there. It seems like such a small and simple thing, but it's things like...
Is he suggesting that if there is a website that is like, "Death to all minorities, I am the master race," the only way you could identify it's that kind of website is if it has an Iron Cross or a Hakenkreuz. And thankfully they always include those, and those in the past were the way you could tell it was a racist website. So if people can't tell from that, they can't tell from any of the content.
Like this, that erode our safeguards against dangers we sacrifice so much to fight. By the time you've played 100 hours of being a Nazi, their voice stabs become memes and in-jokes with your friends. By the 1,000th time you've respawned as a terrorist, you're either celebrating them or making fun of them, neither of which helps the global crisis we have.
Nor does playing any other video game without terrorists.
That takes thousands of lives every year. So what do?
Your video doesn't help either, you dumb shit.
That's easy. Don't make them morally equivalent.
They don't. I don't use video games as a source for moral guidance. Authoritative moral guidance. I know there's a push for that to be the norm. I know that there are various government-funded initiatives to look into being able to use games to instill values into people, and there's encouragement of people to look at games as their moral guide and try to restrict games to only putting across messages that agree with God knows whose values. But actually, you should simply not take video games as authoritative moral guidance. Simply reject that entirely. Games could present a moral message, make a moral argument that you might agree or disagree with. They should never be looked at as authoritative moral guidance. If I believed that people absorbed messages from video games like this, basically the hypodermic model of consumption of media, I would advocate for total destruction of all media. To be clear, if I agreed with this guy's beliefs about media, I think all media should be destroyed and outlawed. Entirely. Because they're insanely dangerous weapons. If you could just slip under people's skin any message you want by having them engage with it in a video game. Outlawed. Too dangerous, humans shouldn't have them. If you believe what this guy believes, and you don't want them outlawed, this guy's scary as fuck. He wants to he's not anti-brainwashing, he's anti-wrong brainwashing. Fuck, creeper, creeper, creeper.
Don't make there be no in-game moral difference between your Nazis and your allies.
In-game moral difference. The Nazis are the bad guys in our game, but you can pay $4.99 for a moral booster DLC, and then the Nazis are no longer the bad guys when you play as them.
Between your terrorists and your counter-terrorist squads. Frame PvP as a trade.
True. Terrorists are better because they have the AK, which is a guaranteed headshot at any range, I believe. Or at least a longer range than the counter-terrorist options for rifle at that price point.
Training exercise. Or simply take one of your non-odious sides and recolor them so that it's red versus blue, rather than Axis versus allies.
Dog, you can still infer political meaning, bro. I'm sure, hey, we need to take political messaging out of this game. We're going to change our game to death to reds, better dead than red.
A good example of a game that does this is Rainbow Six Siege. All of your bomb diffusion and hostage rescue multiplayer with no normalizing terrorists. In fact, by having all of the characters as counter-terrorists training for a possible threat, it highlights how real and present of a threat that is. And if you decide that you need to have both sides be playable, don't make them interchangeable.
Interchangeable how?
Don't have players randomly spawn in as one or the other. Allow players to choose which side they're on.
Do you understand the idea of a competitive game? In Counter-Strike, the terrorists and counter-terrorists are not interchangeable, which is why you have to play as both at some point in a match. Right? You need balanced teams in terms of size, which is why you can't have everyone choose either. Are you insane? I think they are. We've heard enough of their videos to know they are insane. You have to not let people choose because they aren't interchangeable.
Now, of course, this has all sorts of in-game problems, such as creating shorter wait times for fascists.
My man thinks people are going to be choosing allies only.
But you know what? Those wait times could be artificially extended if it meant players had an active choice in what teams they would represent if you're saying we need people playing Nazis in our games. And if you're going to say, but we need it for historical reasons...
Oh, it's cool. It's a cool setting that many people are familiar with.
Then your game better actually be historical. You can't really just hide behind the fact you called your desert map El Alamein and say, but it's
El Alamein.
Historical. If that were the case, you need your PvP to at least represent real historical events and be a realistic take on those battles.
But this doesn't solve your problem. You'd still have people playing as Nazis in a realistically represented conflict. What do you mean? How does this fulfill your demands.
Once you make both sides balanced, it's also no longer historical. And you can't really say that you need Nazis anymore for historical accuracy. Oh, and once you let players get cool weapons that weren't actually at that particular battleground, it's also no longer historically accurate.
Damn. It's almost as if it's not instilling ideas about the real world at all in people. And is clearly just funny video game. Not necessarily funny, but fun video game. Strange.
And you can't declare that your game will suffer if you don't put players in the jackboots of the Third Reich. And once your map is something carefully designed to have good gameplay by a team in a room in San Francisco or LA, and it's not a faithful reconstruction of the actual places the historical events occurred in, you can no longer say we need to.
You can no longer say it's a tool of indoctrination of gamers. Yeah, it's very clearly a game with a lick of paint. Yeah.
Have players.
You're right. Extra credits, you're correct.
Take up arms in service of terror or hate. And look, we're not saying we can't.
Is this a guy whose entire view is defined by counter-argument to comment section idiots? He doesn't have any foundation whatsoever, it's just purely response to morons. Because I'm aware of what he's probably responding to, but he's not provided a foundation to it, and he hasn't actually provided the opposing side, so it just seems insane.
Have games about World War II or about terrorism. We're not even saying we shouldn't make games where you play as a Nazi or a terrorist. But what we are saying is that the fact that you're playing as a Nazi or a terrorist in a game has to mean something. And it can't just be a skin.
It's not in Counter-Strike.
It can't be something that a game randomly drops you into. And really,
you're worried about games making you play as a Nazi because that would normalize Nazis and symbols and appearances related to them. You think you can have players play as Nazis, but only if it's a game where the player has to want to play as a Nazi, and it's clear the perspective of the game is that Nazis are bad. But someone who specifically really wants to play as a Nazi won't care about that condemnation, so what's the point? And anyone who does care about that condemnation, why would they deliberately choose to play as a Nazi in a game about how horrible Nazis are? This is insane. This was only 4 years ago and people still, respect their opinion?
If we are saying anything in this episode, it's this. Games can do better. And in this particular case, it's not even that hard to do better. And it's no more costly to do better. All it requires is that we in the game industry be cognizant of the world around us.
Just achieve omniscience.
And what these symbols we're drawing on mean.
Pinned comment. Hey folks. So this one seems to have struck a nerve. We encourage discussion about the topic, and there is some fair criticism of the video out there. However, I wanted to address some of the comments that seem to have misunderstood some aspects of the video. We never said that playing as a Nazi turns you into a Nazi. That's not how that works. That's not how any of this works. You actually did suggest that it would result in some people becoming Nazis. That did happen. You didn't say you instantly become one. You said it would desensitize people to the symbols, potentially leading them to read material with warning signs in the form of those symbols that they otherwise would have noped out of when they saw those symbols, become accepting of the ideology, become a Nazi. You did actually say that. You didn't say it automatically makes everyone become a Nazi. You did suggest that having people play as Nazis in this way would lead to at least some of them literally becoming Nazis. No, you did. I just watched this. However, there is plenty of research about how art and media can shift people's perspectives. This is not a good or bad thing. This is just a natural effect of culture. Please look up the Overton window! I don't think these guys made any sort of argument about the Overton window in their video. What would the implication be here? What would the implication be here if he means this relates to the Overton window? Discussing the Iron Cross will be deemed acceptable in political discourse? What do you mean? So no, playing a Nazi doesn't magically transform you into a Nazi. No one is saying that. If anyone's saying you're saying that, it's some dipshit YouTube commentator. We never said that games should never let you play as Nazis or terrorists for that matter. True, you said some other insane stuff, though. If you need the exact timestamp, it's at 4:47. There's a lot of potential for some really interesting or impactful games that put the players in the boots of people or in control of systems that have done incredible harm. But it can't be done thoughtlessly, or just as a skin on top of mechanics, devoid of context. Can and has been and will continue to be done. Get owned, moron. Do you think this guy had a panic attack when Counter-Strike 2 was announced? For those saying that it's just a game and we shouldn't think too hard about it, when they say you shouldn't think too hard about it, they're saying you're overthinking. As in the schizoid sense. They're not saying, be ignorant, don't think. Brondo good. They're saying, hey, you're being a bit neurotic. I feel like perhaps it might be important to introduce ourselves. Hi, we're Extra Credits. Our tagline for a very long time was, because games matter. It's something we fundamentally believe, and if you don't, that's okay. You said it's not okay, actually. This video literally says it's not okay to think that regarding multiplayer games where you can be put onto the Nazi team automatically. But then our content might not be for you, because thinking hard about games is kind of our shtick. There's a difference between overthinking and thinking hard. Alright? Our writing staff is the same. We've always talked about politics and games in our other videos. If this comes as a surprise to you, or you think there's been a large shift in our thinking, I'd invite you to check our IQ test from 10 years ago. We were always this stupid. No. Take a look at some of our older episodes. We live in a time where neo-Nazis exist, and they've seemed to have increasingly found a home in gaming communities. This isn't something we can turn a blind eye anymore. And it's important to consider what we as game designers can do to try and make things better. The premise of your video is that the threat this design poses regards people who are not Nazis specifically. The example you pointed to as the worst is when you could randomly be made into being a Nazi in the game. You could randomly be put on the Nazi team, rather, I should say. Why is that a problem to a neo-Nazi? You mean they're hype? Because it makes neo-Nazis hype when they get picked for the Nazi team? What do you mean? As said, there have been some valid critiques of the video that we greatly appreciate. Most important to us, though, is responding to the ones we feel we can most easily present as unreasonable. Never mind. Alright. For those of you who have kept civil in the comments, thank you. For those who need a reminder, our cock can be found here.